Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the Cradle Bites. Today, William Van Wagenen is joining me, my fellow at the Cradle. He's a journalist, a writer, and he has an upcoming book regarding the Syrian war. Hello, William.
Hey, Kareem, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Fine.
I'm
So
good.
today we're going to talk about the recent events that happened in Syria, especially in Aleppo, and of course, there's many people hearing about the SDF, the SNA, and of course about Al Nusra Front. So, can you talk to us more about them and what happened in the past 3 days?
Yeah, so the Nusra Front, or their current name, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, they're a former Al-Qaeda group led by Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, who is a member of the Islamic State of Iraq and a colleague or a deputy of ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So he's enjoyed support from the United States, from Qatar, from Turkey for many, many years. In fact, his group, the Nusra Front at the time, they were able to capture Idlib governorate in Syria, in northwest Syria, in 2015, largely with the help of suicide bombers on the one hand, and U.S. Supplied TOW anti-tank missiles on the other. The CIA was supplying those. So that's how Idlib became, quote unquote, the largest Al-Qaeda haven since 9/11. According to Brett McGurk, a former, actually current U.S. Counterterrorism official, although that phrase is kind of a misnomer because it's the United States that's supporting terrorism, obviously. So they invaded parts of Aleppo from Idlib on Wednesday. They were joined by another group called the Syrian National Army, which is Turkish-backed. Basically, they're Turkish mercenaries. That group includes many former ISIS members. The group incorporated many ISIS members when it formed, and they basically occupied territory northeast of Aleppo with the help of the Turkish army. So they joined in on the attack, and then finally there's the Syrian Democratic Forces. They're Kurdish. Basically, it's the PKK. Just think of them as the Kurdistan Workers' Party, who have occupied northeast Syria with U.S. forces for the past 8 years, basically stealing Syrian oil and sending it on through Kurdistan, Iraq, and then to Turkey so that it can be purchased by Israel. So it was a shock, though, because, for example, journalist, Syrian Armenian journalist Kevork Almasian, who's a really great analyst, he was warning in October that these U.S. and Israeli backed groups, namely Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or HTS, they were preparing a big offensive, or to attack Syria from the northwest, as Israel was bombing sites along the Syria-Lebanon border and in the Golan Heights as part of the war with Hezbollah, because Syria is a very important member of the Axis of Resistance, and all the weapons that come to Hezbollah come, maybe not all, but many of them come through Syria across the borders to the Bekaa Valley. So anyways, Kevork Almasian, he was warning since October that this big offensive was coming. These so-called rebel groups were creating videos, and they had all this brand new equipment, and you could tell they were well funded. They had a good media operation or propaganda operation going. Typically, it's British intelligence that would run media operations for these Al-Qaeda groups. And Kevork basically predicted it, and he was warning on Twitter all over the place. And then suddenly on Wednesday, these groups came, and the Syrian army basically put up very little, if any, resistance. And HTS was able to take multiple villages. And then finally on Saturday, they were able to occupy large parts of western Aleppo, including the ancient citadel. So it's a big shock. But that's anyway. So then the SNA, Syrian National Army, they joined as well. But then the Kurdish forces, they came and tried to help defend Aleppo, at least the Kurdish neighborhoods like Sheikh Mahsoud, and they've essentially been allied with the Syrian army. So the situation is very tough for civilians in Aleppo. There's like food shortages emerging. and the road to Damascus has been cut off, the M5 highway. So it's kind of a shock. Apparently, Syrian forces have been regrouped north of the city of Hama. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it is shocking because in the first 24 hours, the armed groups they announced that they took over 34 villages and towns, and the next day they announced that they acquired 52 towns and villages, and the third day we saw them in the heart of Aleppo. It was so shocking. I think the Syrians and Russians they trusted Turkey too much because, of course, that was a breach of the agreement that happened 4 years ago between the three parties, between Syria, Iran, and Russia on one hand, and Turkey on the other hand, that these borders will not be breached or no attacks will occur from Idlib into Aleppo. But that's exactly what happened 3 days ago. And as you said, currently the Syrian army is stationed northern of Hama, and there's fierce battles currently. And before we started this bites, I read that the Syrian army regained around 12 villages and towns, and the clashes are still ongoing. And of course, Russia also is aiding the Syrian army in their airstrikes against these armed groups in Idlib and in the outskirts of Aleppo. And of course, we saw that the Syrian army used the Toshka missile, which is a tactical ballistic missile against these groups. Until now, still days will tell us what will happen, because before we were chatting, me and William, and you remember that it took them more than 1 year or maybe 2 years to regain the M5 road that you talked about. And it's very weird that they let it out and they didn't even defend it, and the groups took it in 2 days. Yeah, the road is very important. It connects Syria, West Syria to East Syria to North Syria. It's a very important road. And thus, there were no resistance. Usually the acts of resistance, it's named acts of resistance, but we didn't see any resistance. Do you have any thoughts about that? There's people saying that the Syrian army fled away. People said that people were bribed. Maybe what happened is similar to what happened in Mosul. So do you have any idea about these stories?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I have no inside information or anything, but those are all possibilities. I mean, on the one hand, if you want to be more optimistic, you could say, maybe there's a strategy on the part of the army that they, didn't have the forces to repel the attack. I mean, apparently there's a huge attack, large numbers of these HCS militants with tanks and large numbers of drones. Apparently they received many drones from Ukraine. And as we've seen, with Hezbollah attacking northern Israel for the past year, drones are just playing a huge role in warfare now. And it's kind of hard to surprise anyone with big troop movements. So again, that's another reason it seems odd that the Syrian army appeared to be unprepared. I mean, there's Russian surveillance. They would have seen all of these troops massing. But, maybe there is an advantage that the militants had as a result of drones. And they had tanks, etc. So, hopefully there is, again, I'm not a military person, so I probably shouldn't even comment, but hopefully there is a strategy behind it. And maybe the militants are getting overstretched by occupying too much territory. And then, the Syrian army and the Russians will basically take them out, largely through airstrikes, perhaps, and quickly regain the territory. But it's just disturbing because, basically the so-called rebels in 2012, basically a Salafist FSA group called the Liwa at-Tawhid, and then also the Al-Qaeda group, Jabhat al-Nusra, which is now HTS. They invaded Aleppo and terrorized the inhabitants of the east side of the city there, totally looted everything, looted the factories, kidnapped many people, lots of Christians especially. And it took the Syrian army until December 2016 to liberate the city. And it was, there were a lot of sacrifices that had to be made to liberate Aleppo back then. So to see it just fall so quickly again, it just is kind of reminiscent of Mosul in 2014, where Masoud Barzani and the U.S. And the Saudis and the Turks had basically done a deal with ISIS to allow ISIS to come in and take over Mosul, where Masoud Barzani's Peshmerga would then take over Kirkuk and take over the oil fields there, so they could start exporting oil via Turkey to Israel. And so there was a lot of collaboration between Erdogan and Israel all through that period, even though Erdogan even then was, speaking strongly against the Israelis constantly. So that's an interesting aspect now, is that Erdogan for the past, year, since the beginning of the genocide in Gaza, has been one of the strongest people to publicly or verbally condemn Israel. But of course, he's still been allowing oil to travel through Turkey from Azerbaijan. That's fueled the Israeli war machine. And now it looks exactly like Erdogan and Netanyahu were collaborating just like in the old days, because as soon as there was a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, Netanyahu gave a speech where he threatened Syria, and they immediately started bombing the borders between Lebanon and Syria. And then as journalist Vanessa Beeley, who's based in Damascus, was immediately warning when the ceasefire was signed, she said, now they're going to turn to Syria. And that's exactly what happened, where these HTS militants that enjoy, and SNA militants that enjoy Turkish support and Israeli and US support, of course, they immediately invaded Aleppo. So there's definitely coordination with the Israelis going on. That's seems quite obvious.
Yeah, of course. And of course, we saw their social media during the war. Every time Israel hits any base or any positions for Hezbollah, these people in Idlib, they were cheering for Israel, and like even asking Israel to go harder and harder. And now suddenly, after the war ends, and we know Hezbollah is not as powerful as before. Now I think they withdrew many people from Syria, so they took a chance, and they attacked. And of course, we all heard Netanyahu threatening Bashar al-Assad in person, and he named him this time. And many people now, especially the Iraqis, are very afraid that this will spread to other places, not only in Idlib and Aleppo. They're afraid that maybe something would occur on their borders. And we saw many Iraqis going to the border, many armed Iraqis from the government. And there's people saying that they are going to aid the Syria and the Syrian army. I don't think so, personally. I think these are like people only going to defend the Iraqi borders, because currently I don't think they are able to do that, especially with the threats from Israel. I think if there's like a big group going to Syria or coming towards the Lebanese border, they will be bombed, unfortunately. So what do you think? Do you think this might spread to other places, or it will remain in Idlib? Will be it happen in other places?
It's hard to say, because in recent, about in the past year, there has been closer collaboration between the Iraqi government in Baghdad and the Turkish government. Turkey has invaded northern Iraq, the Kurdish areas of northern Iraq, with the collaboration of, again, Masoud Barzani's KDP in Erbil, but also with the apparent agreement of the government in Baghdad. They're trying to build this new transit route from Basra in the south of Iraq, this like a commercial or economic highway that travels all the way up northern Iraq and into Turkey. And so I don't know if the Iraqi government would stand in the way of Turkey potentially coming deeper into Iraq from the north. And I can tell you that Yazidis that I've spoken with in Sinjar, which is west of Mosul and basically right in the firing line if the Turks invade further, they are really terrified right now of another genocide, because again, after Turkey and the Kurds and the U.S. Schemes to take over Mosul, let ISIS take over Mosul in 2014. That was in June, and just 2 months later, then Masoud Barzani facilitated ISIS fighters to move into Sinjar, which had been occupied by the Kurdish Peshmerga until that time. the Kurdish Peshmerga withdrew on purpose deliberately so that ISIS could come in and massacre Yazidis and take them as sex slaves and commit the genocide. And so Yazidis now in Sinjar are really scared that, something similar could happen. And even earlier this year, there were a lot of reports of ISIS members being released from the prisons in Hasaka basically under PKK or the SDF control. A lot of people don't know there's a lot of collaboration between the PKK and ISIS, and many former ISIS members were incorporated in the PKK. And there's basically been this army in waiting of ISIS members sitting in the El Hol camp under the PKK or the SDF's control. And a lot of them were released from prison earlier this summer. So Yazidis have been really worried ever since the summer that something's going to happen. And then seeing these hordes of Turkish and U.S. and Israeli-backed mercenaries invading Aleppo is definitely making them fearful right now of another genocide. So,
Yeah, we have hard times upon us, and of course, I think Russia and Iran should up their game, because currently we all know that Gaza is now turned into a rubble. Apparently, Hezbollah didn't do very well in the recent war, and now they are weaker than before. And now, if the turn is to Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian government, then Iran will be left, and then they will attack Iran directly. That's my thoughts, because if you look at it from the Israeli perspective, okay, Hamas now is very weak. Okay, we made a deal with Hezbollah, which is now weak. We have the Syrian army, now they are fighting in the north. We can maybe invade from the south, maybe take more land near Julan, south of Damascus. And then we will have all the time left for Iran. Maybe try to make sabotage or different attacks as they always do inside Iran. So I think, and of course Russia, if Syria is weaker, Hezbollah is weaker, and if Iran is weaker, then Russia is weaker, because let's be honest, Russia doesn't have a lot of allies. They have some allies in Africa, and of course China. But other than that, in Europe and in North America and in South America, their allies, they are not that sovereign, or they are not as effective as, of course, Iran and the axis of resistance in the region.
yeah, and I worry about Russia. I mean, they have interest in Syria, so you would think that they would intervene strongly to prevent what's going on, but which they did to their credit in 2015. I will always give President Putin a major credit for stepping in 2015 in September with the Russian Air Force.
Well, now they are bombing, but not as effective as people would expect. The bombing campaign started today, which is 3 days after the attack.
Yeah, and so I'm sometimes find it a little bit hard to trust Russia, to be honest. They just have too many ties with Turkey. They have too many business ties with Turkey, too much of a relationship with Turkey. Russia still has major connections to Israel. I mean, there's large, Russian Jewish population in both Israel and then in Russia itself. And Putin has always been friendly with Netanyahu. So I sometimes get a little bit worried about, Russia, but, maybe they will surprise me. I keep my fingers crossed. I don't want to be too negative, but yeah, it's tough. Again, the idea of the axis of resistance, of course, is to fight on, the unity of the fronts, is to fight on all the fronts together. But it's just been tough because it seems like Israel's been able to just hit one front at a time. They had a year mostly to go after Gaza. I will always also be grateful to Hezbollah and Syed Hassan Nasrallah for doing what they could to support Gaza. But again, Israel, after a year of pounding Gaza, was then able to turn more attention to Hezbollah, and now with the ceasefire, looks like they're going after Iran. So they seem to be hitting each, front or a member of the axis of resistance separately, and they just have this unlimited supply of bombs from the United States and unlimited amount of money. They're maybe low on manpower, and I think Hezbollah made some major progress in inflicting damage to soldiers in the Israeli army. And yeah, again, these reports of the army regrouping north of Hama and retaking villages. And again, I'm not a military person at all, so hopefully I'm just kind of ignorant to the situation, and there is a good counteroffensive plan in place, and the Russians will come in hard and help the Syrian army. I will continue to. Again, I don't want to be too negative and downplay what they're doing, but I guess we'll kind of see in the coming days.
Your enemy is always surprising you, and you never surprise your enemy. There's no element of surprise coming from the acts of resistance. And that's, we can see the importance of the element of the surprise. For instance, in assassinating Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, we saw the element of surprise when they attacked Aleppo, and within 3 days they managed to capture the heart of the city. I think we lack the element of surprise, and we are just reacting to what's happening around us. We're not acting. And I think they should start to act. So that's my thoughts, and hopefully we'll have better days. And I want to thank all our subscribers and listeners. And of course, please share this video, give it a like, and subscribe to our Patreon. And do you have any final words, William?
No, I mean, I guess I would just say maybe a final word on Hezbollah and the ceasefire. I mean, one thing is that when Israel massacred, probably hundreds of its own soldiers and civilians on 7th of October with helicopters and drones and tanks to the Hannibal Directive, and used that as a pretext to go into Gaza, they were also trying to launch a preemptive strike against Hezbollah at that time. I don't know if these reports are true, but supposedly the Biden administration essentially asked them to hold off and wait and just focus on the genocide in Gaza. But I think it is really commendable what Hezbollah was able to do, because in my opinion, Israel's goal wasn't just to return the settlers to the north or get 1701 implemented or have the Lebanese army, deployed to the border. Their goal was to totally remake the Middle East and destroy Hezbollah. And Israel, again, with the backing of the United States, is just a powerful and sinister enemy, and Hezbollah was able to stand up to them and survive and inflict casualties. There's still a lot of danger, again, with Trump coming into office. Maybe the supplies of weapons may accelerate even more than they did under Biden, which would be shocking, but could be possible. So probably hard days ahead. But I just feel like that was a big achievement on the part of Hezbollah. And I mentioned this to you before, but yesterday I had the chance to go to the place where Hassan Nasrallah was martyred, and there were a lot of people there, and everyone was very sad, and a lot of people were praying. But the few people I was able to talk to basically said, we lost Hassan Nasrallah, and that was a big blow, but we did stand up to Israel, and we fought hard, and we're still here. We still have our weapons. We still have our men. So I think that's a major achievement to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you, William. Thank you to our viewers.